All right. You've gotten a lot of excellent advice, which is fortunate because I'm generally pretty terrible at giving advice on this sort of thing. I'm also terrible at Twitter, so if you would write to me, which I would very much like, please teach me how to respond to you first without responding to the universe and all those poor people out there who are following me expecting that I'm going to tweet one day. So I work for a print magazine. I've been doing this a long time. I've been at Geographic for 8 years now as the environment editor. I was a science journalist covering everything from astronomy to zoology for about 20 years before that. And still, frankly, when I look for stories, what really excites me about stories is still just the ones that tell me something really new and surprising about how the world works. It's the basic science, even in environment stories. So I think there's, somewhere deep in my DNA is something that forbids me from thinking that the world is going to end in catastrophe, and I just can't persuade myself. So even when I'm writing about these urgent stories or editing, as I do more often, the urgent stories that have to be told about what's happening to the world out there, I'm looking for some little clue about how the world works. So if I'm writing a story about how the Antarctic ice sheet really seems like it could collapse a lot faster than we thought. What I really remember learning when I did that story was this new mechanism about how as the West Antarctic ice sheet retreats down its basin, the cliff of ice gets larger and larger, and suddenly that cliff of ice becomes unstable and it could collapse really fast. And I thought, wow, that is cool. Oh no, it's actually a catastrophe. I shouldn't be excited about it, but the fact is, it is kind of exciting to me. So I look for stories that tell me something new like that. I look for stories that tell me not just how the world is, but why it is. So stories that give me a long historical arc. And especially at Geographic, we're looking for stories that help us understand other people, including people who are, maybe not so good for the environment right now. Why do they do the things they do? Why do they think that way? And this is very much agreeing with Ross. At Geographic, we are like at the Atlantic, we're still in the somewhat precious treasure of having an audience that does not fall in one line. We cut across lines, and every time you write an article about climate, you realize that because you get a lot of mail telling you just how misguided you are to think that it isn't a hoax. But that's a good thing. We are talking not just to the converted. We are talking to a broad audience, and it's a global audience. And stories that offer hope. Well, hell, we all want that. Okay, so Geographic is a photography magazine. The director of photography tells me that all the time. Why don't I get that? If I want to propose those stories I'm proposing, why don't I go work for the Atlantic, for God's sake? Then I wouldn't have to suggest stories that can be photographed. So if you have ideas that you think might be good for Geographic, that's fantastic. You don't have to send the pictures. We're going to do the pictures. We're going to spend a year doing the pictures. But the story has to be susceptible to having a real visual narrative, which means it has to have variety, unless it's about a lion or some amazingly charismatic animal, in which case we'll run 20 pages just of pictures of that beast. But if it's any other kind of story, there needs to be variety to it. So, for instance, I'm trying to get a story on air pollution in the magazine. Global air pollution seems broad, right? I've got to convince the photo editors, air pollution, what are we going to show? We're going to show people with masks, and then what's the second photo? I say, well, no. I mean, I think we'll get it. We'll get there, but it's that kind of thing. They've got to be able to see variety and an interesting narrative. Places were, of course, since we're going to be taking these pictures, it's a very place-based narrative we do, but it has to be a place that has some global resonance. We can't get too local. It can't be, we get innumerable suggestions for stories on the latest mine that's going to rape the latest part of the earth. Or the latest dam that's going to destroy some valley. We do those stories, but we do them when we think they have some particular global resonance. So for instance, we do a story about damming the Mekong River because it really presents, first of all, because it's a uniquely large and until recently mostly undammed river, but also because it presents this global challenge that people in developing countries face of needing to get clean energy, but while also trying to preserve the nature that they still have. And that is one of the universal challenges of our age. So those are the kinds of things we're interested in. And finally, I work at, National Geographic is really kind of a strange organization. I mean, I work at the magazine, but the magazine is part of a larger organization, which is also a conservation organization. It's also a science organization. And so we wrestle with this question of message versus story. We have a message, we have certain messages we want to get out, but I'm a journalist. I'm not about getting out the message. I'm not about getting out your message, even if it's a message I deeply believe in. I'm really about reporting what's happening in the world and telling a good story. And so, I don't know, maybe this will come up in the discussion, but more and more these days we talk about what's the right way to message? What's the right way to frame a story so that it'll have the impact. We're even doing scientific research on how best to do that. And something about that always makes me really uneasy because I feel like that's not quite really what the journalist's mission is. So an example of a story that I liked recently is this one about Manyu National Park in Peru. So this is one place, but it's a pretty special place. It's one of the most diverse parts of the planet, biodiverse parts of the planet. These are Matsagenka, members of the Matsagenka tribe looking on at the Manyu River, and that's their pet spider monkey. And so the thing that's really interesting about this place, we did a year-long series on parks, and this was the article where we were trying to get at the whole issue of what is the relation between people and parks, and especially between people who live in parks. In this country, as you may know, we solved that problem where we had people living in places like Yellowstone that we were going to make a park. We kind of booted them out. Well, in Manyu National Park, there are indigenous people who have been living there for a long time. And they even hunt monkeys. And so the story started with that scene of going monkey hunting with these people. And so this is an example of you read that and you go, monkeys, why? That sounds terrible. But actually, where you came out to, if you followed the story, first of all, you understood who these people were, what the history of this place is. This is the southern boundary of the park, the Alto Madre de Dios River. You came away understanding that maybe these people are actually protectors of the park. They don't kill a lot of monkeys. They've been doing it for a long time. They are actually, and they think of themselves, and they actually are a part of the natural system. Now, not everyone agrees with that. We quoted people in the story who say, it would really be better if there were no people in the park at all. So that's the tension, and that's an example of this kind of global issue that when we do a very place-based specific story like that, we're trying to get at. And so here's a pretty picture of an ocelot. And this is Yoina, who has a saddleback tamarin on her head, her pet. Okay, thank you.